part 2 of this short series that I'm doing all about the steps I've taken to batik, dye, and sew a linen dress. If you missed part 1, what I did was to scour the linen fabric, which just means a pre-wash in order to shrink the fabric, remove any starches or oils from production and shipping, and basically just get the fibers as naked as possible, which is essential for a good dye job. I will link part 1 up above here. As a professional dye artist and educator, I have a wide variety of treatment options that I can do to this gorgeous linen that, by the way, I got from Fabric Wholesale Direct. So thanks to them for this fabric. I use fiber reactive dyes exclusively, which are low-impact cold process dyes that are formulated to dye cellulosic fibers, meaning from a plant, just like this linen, which is spun from the flax plant. So using fiber reactive dyes, I can choose to dye this fabric in a number of ways. I could tie dye it, but that's not really my style these days. I could ice dye it, which I love, or shibori dye it, which I love, or I could just plain low water immersion dye it, which I also love. But what I'm choosing to do is to use my hand-carved woodblocks that are specially made just for batiking and stamping all over half the yardage with this one stamp. I got 2 yards of white and 2 yards of a color they call gold, which to me looks more like an amber wheat color. And you'll see me batik that next in this video after I'm done batiking the white. I was so surprised and pleased by the quality of this linen. And it almost feels like a little scary to start messing with it, but I have to remember that that is the whole point of receiving the fabric. And to be honest, it's way easier to take my time as I think about what pattern I want to sew with the linen as I go through the steps of altering it. So because I'm a batik artist and I cannot stop from using these stamps obsessively, but because I do want some of the yardage to not have the print on it, I actually split both of the fabrics in half. So what you see here is me batiking half of the white and then half of the gold. I'm still trying to settle on a color scheme, but I will have it figured out by the time I film part 3. Okay, so what I want to teach you about what's happening here is that I am dipping the block into 100% beeswax, which is being held at about 220 degrees or so in my electric skillet over there on the left side of the screen. I have to dip the block into the hot wax for every stamp that I make. So after doing 2 wide yards of this fabric, I was feeling it in the top of my shoulder. By the way, being able to do repetitive craft tasks with fewer injuries is pretty much the main reason I go to the gym, besides for the mental health benefits. And if you don't understand that yet, you're probably not in your 40s. So I dip the block into the hot wax and I give it a sharp flick with my wrist to shake off the excess, and then I immediately press it firmly and flatly to the fabric. The goal of batiking is to have the wax go all the way through the fabric to the back so that it creates a solid resist area where the dyes can't go. Kind of like how oil and water don't mix, the beeswax fills the fabric wherever I stamp it, and those areas cannot be dyed. I'm improvising a repeating but random print with the same woodblock, the Raise topper from the Swedish Garden collection that was actually designed by the women who produced these blocks for me. It is intended to be the top of a botanical design, but I'm in a big phase of just loving this design all by itself. So I'm just using Raise. I did some practice fabric a few weeks ago, and you can see it in part 1 of this series. And I know that my eyeballs just love looking at it being stamped all over. So as much as I was tempted to vary it up and use a different design, I couldn't bring myself to use anything else for this project. There are actually 4 different toppers in the Swedish Garden collection, and here they are. The fabric needs to be rotated once I fill up the side that's closest to me so that I'm not reaching a hot and dripping block all the way across the width of the fabric, which could result in a cooler temperature of the wax, so that wouldn't penetrate as well, or too many drips on the cloth as I reach across it, or possibly both. So I pick up the fabric and I turn it over or rotate it 90 degrees so that I can more easily batik the part that's closest to the hot wax. I always work with the wax on my right, which is my dominant hand side, and that is how my mentors taught me when I studied these woodblocks in India. I didn't plan out the spacing for the raise ahead of time, preferring to instead trust my instincts and my eyes to make a very human imperfection-filled fabric that is in no way regular but still has a rhythm to it. And you can't tell in the video, but I'm looking at 3 things as I go. First is the orientation of the block in my hand, like which way is up and how it's pointing and how I've rotated it. 2, the space I'm aiming for, like where I'm going to stamp it and what orientation it needs to be slightly different than its neighbors, so I don't have too many of like the same orientation in a row. And then 3, finally, the general spacing that I've been creating as I go all over the fabric, aiming to keep it pretty standardized from beginning to end, which is harder than it sounds. When I first started doing this, I would start at one end of the fabric and the spacing would be quite different by the time I got to the end. So just keeping an eye on like the negative space between stamps and also rotating and flipping the fabric so I kind of work from all over is really helpful to get a different visual perspective as I go. The top of my shoulder is really aching at this point and the video is sped up, but I try to surrender to the calm pleasantness that is a simple repetitive task. Be grateful for the feel of the linen under my hand and the smell of the beeswax. It's a beautiful, soothing job, and I'm so glad you're here to watch me do it. Of course, I should mention that wherever the wax goes, the fabric will stay the color that it started. So even though it looks like I'm printing darker rays onto a lighter background, the finished result is actually going to be the reverse of that. I'll be dyeing these fabrics with fiber reactive dyes, and so the background will be darker and the rays will be lighter after I remove the wax. Using these hand-carved woodblocks is a pleasure that I wish everyone could know. Folks who come to my Asheville studio get to take classes here, and I do travel to teach in a variety of places throughout the year, but if you can't make it to an in-person class, I invite you to subscribe to my newsletter and follow me online so that you'll be the first to know when I open up my next round of online batik workshops. If you like to sew or design your own clothes, batiking fabric and garments yourself is the frosting on the cake for all textile lovers. But do be cautious that not all woodblocks are designed to pick up and deliver hot wax. In fact, most of them on the market are for other kinds of fabric printing, like block printing with dyes or paints or mud. The wood has to be a certain porosity and definitely carved into the end grain to make it a successful batik stamp. Want to see how I dye these fabrics and what colors I choose next? Subscribe so that you'll be sure to see part 3 as soon as I put it up. And thanks so much for watching.